There's a section of beach in Bangladesh that isn't your usual seaside vacation spot.
It's considered to be one of the longest unbroken beaches in the world. There are these huge ships parked at the shore. It's a very, muddy area, it's always noisy.
And amid the noise and mud, thousands of men are busy doing one of the most dangerous recycling jobs in the world.
And then you find workers working on the ships, pulling stuff through that muddy area. Many of them just not even wearing sandals, their bare feet, no gloves, nothing that's required. So there's a lot of things going on simultaneously.
For decades, the shipbreaking yards of Cox's Bazaar have been a graveyard for old and unwanted vessels, the place where the rest of the world sends the boats it no longer wants. But the way this place works could be changing, a change with potentially global implications. In this episode, Tipping Points and Breaking Ships, a story from Bangladesh. Welcome to Just Transition. This podcast is brought to you by Context, a platform powered by the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Just Transition is about the effort to make the planet cleaner and greener,
and recognizing the need for support towards a just transition
without leaving anyone behind.
Just transition
for affected people and communities.
I'm your host, Iman Amrani. This podcast will look at how we are to ensure a just transition and what's at stake if it's ignored.
There is so much that we can do to keep this from getting worse.
Until recently, Naimul Karim was the Thomson Reuters Foundation reporter for Bangladesh, his home country. It wasn't a job where you could ignore climate change.
Yeah, when it comes to climate change, the impacts of climate change, it's something that you get to see on the coastlines of Bangladesh, where a lot of people do get displaced. A lot of them end up moving into cities where they are forced to live in slums. If you come to Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, a large number of people who live in the slums are essentially climate change victims because, they have been forced to come to Dhaka from other cities in Bangladesh.
One story sticks with him. A woman whose house used to be on the coast.
They point towards the water, rising water of the sea, and they tell me, look, I had a house right over there a few years back.
A place which is now underwater.
But then because of the river erosion, I had to bring it here. And, 2 years later, I might have to go further in the area.
In other words, move yet again.
So there are lots of these kinds of stories that come out. There's a lot of displacement.
Is it something that locally people talk about? Do people talk about climate change?
Yeah, they do. They do talk about it. They don't necessarily use the term climate change, but they do talk about it in different ways. For instance, there are people on the coast who say, I have never seen the water rise so high in the last 10 to 15 years. There must be something different going on over here. Some of them, the younger ones at the coastline, they are sort of aware that it's not Bangladesh's fault that they're facing this. They know that the emissions from Bangladesh are really little compared to the rest of the world. So they are sort of aware of the climate change politics as well.
The connections between Bangladesh and the rest of the world are even clearer in the shipbreaking yards of Cox's Bazaar. Bangladesh disposes of a huge proportion of the world's derelict shipping, around a third of the world's scrapped ships by tonnage in 2019. The phone in your pocket, the car you drive, the shirt on your back, all most likely at one point travelled across the world on cargo ships. Ships that are mostly too dangerous, expensive and polluting to dispose of in the West.
I first visited a shipyard in Bangladesh more than a decade ago, and I was obviously quite young and I wasn't aware of what actually workers go through, etc., etc. So there are about 80 functioning shipbreaking yards, and sometimes about only 40 to 50 of them function, sometimes all 80 of them function. It depends upon the ships that come.
If the world's future lies in reducing waste, reusing metals, chemicals and plastics, in recycling what no longer has a use, Cox's Bazaar is the future. Recycling on an industrial scale.
Ships come here from different parts of the world, from Europe, from various parts of the world. When they start heading towards their end of life, the ship eventually comes towards South Asia, in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, where There are shipyards in all of these countries.
Everything that can possibly be reused, resold, or repurposed is taken apart and sold off, from the light bulbs in the ship's canteen to the steel in the ship's anchor. It's a dangerous business.
My name is Ibrahim Khalil, and I'm 48 years old. I was a foreman for more than 34 years.
These are Naimul's recordings of his interview with Ibrahim.
Ibrahim Khalil seemed like someone who was struggling. He was quite thin. I met him near his house. It was a tea stall, and he was sitting there drinking tea.
Even though my house is nearby from here and doesn't take much time to walk, but even this is very painful.
And when he met me, we separated ourselves from the crowd, and he was comfortable with that. And when you see him, I'm not sure if it was depression, but he was really sad when he was talking. He was almost in tears when he was talking about his family and how he's not able to support them right now because he has no work.
I have 2 girls and 2 boys. I have a wife, including my mother at home, and I'm a sole earner. Now that I'm injured, obviously my family is going to be affected.
Yeah, so Ibrahim was a cutter, meaning he cut parts of the ship, and you need a certain amount of skills and expertise for that as well. And so while cutting the ship, that particular part of the ship that he was cutting, it landed on his leg.
The boot on my leg got smashed into pieces, and one of my major veins got cut. As you can see, even now, there's no flesh in this particular area of my leg, even though it's recovering, but you can still see the bone through my leg.
And he was stuck there for some time before help arrived. And then he was sent to the hospital.
The doctor instructed me to cut off my entire leg.
But the owner of the shipyard wouldn't pay for the recommended surgery, and Ibrahim never managed to heal as he could have. He's still not received the medical help that the doctors recommended.
It's been more than 1.5 years since I've been injured sitting at home. The doctor at the yard has just been coming and visiting me for regular dressing, but nothing else. The yard doctor told me that if I had been treated properly, I would have been healed by now. There have been many other accidents on the yards, but the treatment hasn't been consistent. They've been treated for some time and then escaped the situation.
While talking to him, he was repeatedly pointing towards his leg, and he was saying things like, "Can you see it? Like, it's still not recovered. How do you expect me to go back to work?"
In my current state, I'm able to move my leg a bit and sit in some cases, but there's no flesh in this particular area of my leg.
So he seemed like someone who was really desperate to get back to the same work that actually injured him.
I didn't ask the yard for a lot of money. All I asked them was to heal me and pay for my treatment properly. So that post-healing, I want to start working again. Repeatedly, I just keep telling them that.
You can actually feel how desperate he is. Like, here's a job that almost made him lose his leg, and yet he wants to get back to it as soon as possible with the proper treatment. It's not like he's scared of getting injured again. To him, what was important was that he needs to feed his family.
I have only one demand. That is the proper treatment for my leg, so I could be able to walk properly. That's it.
There is a plan to try and make stories like Ibrahim's a thing of the past, or at least much less likely. And not just in Bangladesh. A project to clean up the whole shipbreaking industry across the world.
Yeah. So the Hong Kong Convention focuses on environment and workers' safety. About 50 to 60 countries decided to agree to the Hong Kong Convention in 2009. And essentially, the rules focus on proper disposal of waste, proper safety equipment for workers.
It's not really much of a page-turner, but the convention is ambitious. On paper, it has the potential to change the entire industry.
The parties to this convention, noting the growing concern about safety,
health, the environment, and welfare matters in the ship recycling industry, resolved to effectively address, in a legally binding instrument...
Under the convention, two things would be much more closely controlled. First, the environmental damage done by shipbreaking.
There are lots of these wastes that come out from these ships. Approximately, I think, 30 different kinds of wastes. Some of them are ozone depleting. Some of them are asbestos-related waste that comes up from, the pipes of the ships, which can cause cancer and things like that.
Currently, asbestos is regularly handled by shipyard workers, something that wouldn't be permitted in the West. The ozone-depleting chemicals are ones which can cause damage to the Earth's atmosphere, resulting in the ozone layer hole over the South Pole. Also present in many ships are heavy metals in the paint, all of which flow into the environment, causing harm across the food chain. The convention would monitor and reduce all of that. Every ship would need to carry an inventory of every harmful substance it contains, allowing shipbreakers to dispose of them more safely. Leading us to the second element of the convention.
The rules focus on proper safety equipment for workers. And part of the Hong Kong Convention system is also to have a proper medical supply system so that emergencies can be tackled. There also needs to be a proper monitoring system. Like, say, for instance, when a worker dies, when a worker gets injured, there needs to be proper monitoring system.
The convention has been criticised for not going far enough, but its rules would still represent a huge leap forward in many countries. But you may have noticed the year the Hong Kong Convention was written.
Hong Kong International Convention for the Safe and Environmentally Sound Recycling of Ships, 2009.
13 years ago at the time I'm recording this. So, what happened?
The thing is, the Hong Kong Convention hasn't come into force yet. For it to come into force, there are certain criteria that it needs to meet.
3 conditions to be exact. First, that at least 15 states must sign on. That's already happened. Second, that those states represent 40% or more of world shipping by tonnage. That hasn't happened yet, but it is mostly there. We're currently at 30%. And third, that the states signing up handle at least 3% of global ship recycling. And this is where things have really stalled. Until these tipping points are reached, all these new rules are theoretical or just locally enforced. The convention is just a piece of paper, and it has been since 2009. But right now, those figures don't include Bangladesh. If Bangladesh does ratify, that crucial third condition about global recycling will be triggered. So in theory, Bangladesh has an opportunity to improve not just its own industry, but also to take steps towards creating a global system for protecting the environment and workers' health. But to ratify the treaty, Bangladesh needs to improve standards in its own industry first.
They need to vastly improve the safety standards, and they also need to improve their disposal system, the way they dispose the waste that they get from the ships.
The Bangladeshi government has given the industry a deadline to improve.
So it has given its shipyards a goal, a target, to make its yards compliant by 2023.
That's next year at the time we are recording. So how much further is there to go? A few finishing touches? Some substantial changes? Or...
Right now, out of the 80 yards that are present, only 1 is compliant to the Hong Kong Convention.
Yes, just 1 out of 80. And that's reflected in the safety record. In 2019 alone, there were 24 recorded deaths in the shipbreaking yards, or 1 every 2 weeks.
Yeah, there are many different ways those deaths take place, or injuries take place. So say, for instance, they're on the ship, they're cutting, and then because of lack of planning of how you go about cutting the ship, a worker may fall, or a part of the ship may just land on the worker. Then there's also the issue of gas leakage. When the worker inhales it, the worker dies.
The NGO Shipbreaking platform, which campaigns for improvements to the industry, listed 6 fatal accidents in Bangladeshi shipbreaking yards in the first half of 2021 alone, and 11 severe injuries, and that might not be the full count. One reason why shipbreaking yards in Bangladesh haven't implemented these changes is the cost.
The only one yard that has met these goals, that yard spent millions of dollars, like $8 to $9 million, and a lot of yards don't have that kind of money.
How realistic is it if only one of the yards out of the 80 is in any way following the guidelines? If there's a year to go, does that mean that this can realistically happen, or is it kind of like pie in the sky?
Yeah, so these are the exact questions that I asked the government and monitoring agency. And so one of their immediate replies was like, once Bangladesh ratifies the convention, they'll have 2 years to meet all the goals. So say, for instance, if they ratify in 2023, all of them must be compliant by 2025. So from that perspective, the government is hopeful that the rest of the yards will meet the deal. So for now, the situation is like about all the yards have given their plans, how they plan to proceed.
But even with 2 more years to play with, is this plan realistic?
The government says that they're hopeful that things can happen. So the real sources of information really are from a couple of NGOs who have been following the industry for the last 2 decades. And when you speak to them as well, they tell you that, look, yes, this particular deadline is going to be hard to meet, but you have to understand that there was nothing before 2016. And the situation has drastically changed since 2017.
Do you look at how few shipbreaking yards are close to making the deadline, or do you look at how much worse things were in recent history? In these situations, is the glass half full or half empty?
When I spoke to a number of workers, there are a few things that they say. For instance, most of them say that the situation is a lot better than it was 10 years ago, 10 to 15 years ago. 10 to 15 years ago, there basically wasn't any talk of safety. There wasn't anything. But right now, workers, some of them know about the Hong Kong Convention, that there are these mechanisms that are working on, improving the safety. So from that perspective, things are better. But again, like I mentioned, it's just one yard has met the requirements. I spoke to about 100 workers while working on this. So what they say is that apart from 4 to 5 yards, they're still the same. Outside these 4 or 5 yards, it's difficult to get safety equipment. Sometimes workers have to bring their own gloves, their own boots outside of these 4 to 5 yards. The Ministry of Industries, which handles this particular issue, they tend to have a lot more inspections than before. So on the ground, the opinion is that, yes, it's slightly better than what it was before, but still, majority of the yards have a long way to go.
Do you think the workers themselves expect to see an improvement anytime soon?
The workers are actually the real heroes. Because of their livelihood, they tend to work in these conditions, year after year, and most of them, they're all used to it. Some of the workers who I interviewed, they're like, yeah, this is bad. Yeah, it's bad, but this is life. This is how it is. There's no other option. That's what's there in their mind, right? If not this, then what? What do you want to do? Where do I work if not this? So I guess this is a common mindset which is there based on, the workers that I've spoken to. And I just feel that they obviously deserve a lot better, and there needs to be reforms here. There's still a long way to go.
But even if every yard complies, problems for the workers won't end, because as yards modernise, the opportunities for workers shrink.
There are about 15,000 workers who depend on this industry. Earlier, it was a lot more. It was about 60 to 70,000 people before.
Yards are mechanising and automating.
With the arrival of machines, a lot of them have lost their jobs because of these cranes that have come in. These cranes end up doing a lot of their jobs.
One of the things I do keep asking everyone is, where do you find hope as a journalist or a reporter yourself when you look at the huge issues being faced? Do you feel optimistic about the future?
The situation still obviously needs a lot more improvement, but it has improved gradually. So, yes, you do feel bad, Like, say, for instance, when I meet wives of workers in the shipbreaking industry who passed away, so I met a number of them, and they end up crying every time they start talking to me. And you tend to feel like there's no hope. One wife I spoke to, her son was like 1 month or 2 months old when her husband passed away. And she was crying and she was like, what's the point of talking to journalists? You can't do anything for me. Those kinds of interviews, it really makes you feel like there's so much more to be done. But at the same time, you find these yards which actually tend to help rural workers, rural families who otherwise would have found it very difficult to get into other jobs. You tend to think like, okay, so that there are two sides of the story over here. And then when you think about solutions, there's no one solution. You just can't close the entire industry, right? Like that would make it worse for a lot of workers living there. So yeah, those are some of the thoughts, very conflicting thoughts that go through you when you cover these kinds of stories.
How did Ibrahim see the promise of reforms in the shipbreaking yards?
I asked him what he thought about the reforms that are taking place, and what he said was that a lot of things have changed in the last 10 years. A lot more yard owners are providing safety equipment, but the rest of them are still the same. They still need to improve a lot.
Before, they didn't provide us boots, but now they do. After 2010 or 15, all of this safety equipment is available. They gave us helmet, boots. I would say that around 5% of the companies only follow all the requirements. The rest, 95%, doesn't really provide it consistently, including any equipments. However, I can proudly say I was working among the 5% of the companies, and I was given everything, starting from boots, helmets, and gloves. I've been working in the shipyard for long, so I know the situation about how 95% of the other companies doesn't provide the safety requirements. For these companies, I must say that you have to wear a helmet, shoes, but then there are many other companies that doesn't even mention that you need it for your safety environments.
As a country in Bangladesh, there's the gap between the rich and poor is still a lot. It's still really high. And people assume that these workers are helpless. They're not able to do much. But I think that's the wrong way to look at them, because the workers, they have a lot of pride. They have a lot of respect for themselves. They are running their family with their own money. So they don't want to be looked as someone whom you're helping or supporting or things like that, right? So even when I go and visit these workers at their homes and stuff, they're all very respectful. They all want to feed me. They all want to give me tea, biscuits, and food. They don't want me to leave before having lunch. I've had to deny food and lunch because every house I was going to was just giving me tea and biscuits and everything. And even if you deny it, they might sometimes think that, okay, you're denying because you don't like the food here. What I'm trying to say is they have a lot of respect, they have a lot of pride for themselves. They want to build a career for their children's future. So I think one of the misconceptions is that these people are helpless. They're not helpless. They have a lot of plans and they have a lot of dreams, but when incidents like these take place, that's kind of spoils those dreams and those ambitions that they have.
You can read Naimul Karim's work on the shipbreaking yards of Bangladesh on the Thomson Reuters Foundation website. Link in the show notes. We are also grateful for the help from the International Maritime Organization and from the Shipbreaking Platform, an NGO which campaigns for workers in the industry, in making this episode. Just Transition is made by Antica Productions and Context, a news platform powered by the Thomson Reuters Foundation. This episode was produced by Leo Hornak. Our associate producers are Abby Raheja and Paula Santana. Sound design by Reza Daya. Legal help from Melissa Tesla and Murshid Anwar. Our executive producer is Kathleen Goldar. The president of Antica Productions is Stuart Cox. Our Context team includes Just Transition editor Megan Rowling and editor-in-chief Yasser Khan. The CEO of the Thomson Reuters Foundation is Antonio Zappulla.